games and empathy, and I'm really excited to hear from these fantastic speakers. We have Marina, Diez, Natalie Schmidt, Nida Ahmad, and Ali Lowe with us today. So let's get started. First up, we have the wonderful Natalie Schmidt, who is a writer and game designer based in Los Angeles. Having studied both dramaturgy and game design at Carnegie Mellon University, Natalie specialises in narrative design and script development for multimedia storytelling. She's designed small-scale TT role-playing games, and her previous narrative work for Carnegie Mellon's Human Computer Interaction Institute explored human AI decision-making via branching interactive stories. And she's particularly passionate about meaningful representation of BIPOC within the RPG community, as well as accessibility of design within interactive entertainment. So I will now bring up Natalie to take us away. Hey, Natalie, how are you?
Hi. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you everybody for being here. I'm super excited. I'm going to be talking specifically about designing video games and other digital interactive experiences in general, specifically for people who are brand new to them. And when I say people who are brand new, I mean people who maybe have never played a video game before for any particular reason, or for people who haven't quite explored the realm of laptop gaming or on major consoles, because games on these kinds of platforms and these different kinds of technology definitely present its own kind of set of challenges that as a designer you have to take into account when building a game. So to jump right into it, when people talk about video games, one of the more common words that you might hear is intuitive. For example, in a review, you might hear that this game had really intuitive controls, or it felt really intuitive to attack an enemy with a specific kind of weapon. And intuitive is a good place for your game to be, right? You want your controls, for example, to feel instinctive, for it to feel natural. You don't necessarily want your players to think really hard about just navigating the game and the game tools. After all, you want your players to be focused on finding the next chest or battling the next enemy, not necessarily struggling with how to just move the player character from left to right. But of course, there are only so many assumptions that we can make about what feels intuitive or natural to a player, right? For example, like looking at a game controller, how natural does it feel to press this particular button for the character to jump, or to use this stick to walk around and navigate the world that you see on screen? These are all different things that, particularly in like console gaming, games that use controllers like this, all have a pretty standard movement control system that is pretty fundamental and standard across a lot of the major games on platforms like these. But it becomes even more difficult to discern what feels right or natural to someone who has never touched a controller like this, someone who has never experienced a 3D game before, or played a point and click mouse game on their laptop, and often find that intuitive really means intuitive for someone who already understands games and game conventions. To bring back the controller example, for someone who is well versed in console games, using this stick, you kind of can assume that this is going to be a movement control, and this is going to be a like camera perspective controlling control button. And experienced players can kind of make these assumptions because they have an existing understanding of typical game conventions when it comes to console controllers. Similar things for laptop focused games. The mouse clicks, the space bar, certain keyboard keys are all going to map to relatively the same kinds of actions across a lot of these different kinds of games. because it is a sort of standard. But inexperienced players don't necessarily have this existing base of gaming knowledge. And here is sort of where that feeling of being overwhelmed or apprehensive about picking up a game or beginning to interact with this kind of technology can get really difficult. You can liken it similarly to picking up a new skill or learning a new program like Photoshop. There's going to be a learning curve, and often with technology, that learning curve can be quite steep, especially for an audience that maybe did not grow up with a controller like this or grow up with the fast kind of advancing technology that people of younger generations might be more used to. And taking that learning curve into consideration and acknowledging what your audience may or may not already understand about games and gaming culture is a really important mindset to think about when making your game accessible and making it welcoming to a wide base of people. Here, as a designer, especially with games and digital media, there are an endless number of choices that need to be made. Choices not just about what the player sees or what movements they can actually do. You're making decisions for how your player actually interacts with the game that you've created. And that is anything from learning how to navigate a 3D space on a television screen in front of them to understanding how many of these various input buttons coordinate to a specific action within the game. There are lots of skills, lots of information. Any new player, experienced with games or otherwise, are going to be juggling a lot of different aspects of the game all at once. So you can kind of see where that learning curve and that learning process can be quite daunting for someone who is very unfamiliar with this kind of technology. And this is where we as designers can take a step back, think, and break down the assumptions that we might be making and assumptions that our players might enter and interacting with our games might have, and break down how can we make this learning process easier for people across the board? How can we make it simpler or faster, more digestible for someone who is both well-versed in these kind of genre of games or someone who has no familiarity with them at all? And how do you make it, most importantly, I think, fun and engaging, right? Because games are meant to be enjoyable experiences. And the last thing that you want your player to do is get frustrated before they get to the real meat of the game, right? Getting past the tutorial level is only a small fraction of the whole overall experience. And accommodating your players, accommodating new players, can really only serve to benefit your audience as a whole. Making games accessible to everyone makes things more engaging and fun and easy for everyone, and allows you and your game to enrich and diversify the community that you're reaching, which is a really special thing, right? Being able to create something that people enjoy and can share with other people, share with across a variety of ages, across a variety of other demographics. It's digital media is so wonderful in that it is able to reach so many people. And being able to design something with empathy, making it welcoming and inviting, will encourage new players or new audience members, users, whatever your digital media might be, rather than discourage them with unfriendly mechanics. But ultimately, accommodating new players doesn't necessarily mean simplifying your own ideas. It doesn't necessarily mean going into a really hand-holdy tutorial or something that is very lengthy and detailed. A lot of it deals with communicating information taking that extra care to think about who you're designing for, and all the different possible avenues that you can use to make interacting with new technology just a little bit easier for people across the board. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie. I'll just come and join you. That was fascinating. It's bringing up so many thoughts with me for me of games I've played where the controls have just held it back. So thank you. I'm sure there'll be questions coming in as well. I've got some for you later, but I'll ask everyone if they'd like to unmute and give Natalie a round of applause for her talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic. So next we're going straight on over to Mr. Ali Lowe of Lowtek Games. There he is. Hey Ali, how's it going?
Hello.
So I've done it again where I've almost missed an introduction for you, but just to, just to tell you a little bit about Ali before you get started. Ali has been working as an artist in the games industry for 7+ years and finally took the plunge to start his own indie studio, Lowtek Games. He's on the board of the SGDA, the Scottish Game Developers Association. If you're with us on Friday on Twitch, you might remember Ali was the host of our SGDA virtual play party, which was a huge amount of fun. And Lowtek Games has had a strong focus on retro games and is working on tools to help games be more accessible to dyslexic players. And Ali is going to tell us much more about that now, so take it away.
Well, I've got a lot of slides to go through.
That.
Oh, someone's talking. So I am going to go quite fast through these. So yeah, I'm Ali Lowe, Lowtek Games. Here's my stuff you can find me on online. My talk is, what about your dyslexic players? I am very dyslexic. We found it out when I was at primary school. We were reading these books, The Magic Key. The teacher would give you the book. She would read it to you in class, then you would take it home and you would have to read it to your parents. So my parents realized that I was doing this a bit too well and wasn't really paying attention. So they asked me to read it backwards and realized that I could. And then they asked me to read it with my eyes shut and they also realized that I could. So they realized I wasn't actually reading the book. I was just remembering the words that the teacher had said and relaying them. So as the books got bigger, that got harder. And then, yeah, my coping mechanism didn't work anymore. I'm not like, this isn't just my story. So many other dyslexics have exactly the same thing. Keira Knightley said it in an interview at one point. So like me and her kind of dyslexia buddies, just with a couple of things changed. So living with the dyslexia, you get a lot of fear of missing out. The game that always comes to mind is Final Fantasy VII. It's such an iconic game for so many gamers, but it's so text heavy that we just can't get through it. And a lot of us think it's because of this point here. My friend told me that his friend also got stuck at this stage, and it's because of this bit at the top that says attack while the tail is up. As a dyslexic person, you just grow to ignore text. That you think it's kind of filler flavor text, and that you have to just deal with the actual battle system. But yeah, I died 4 or 5 times and I just completely gave up in the game, which is probably for the best because there was way too much reading anyway. Yeah, attack at the top. But it's not just about the games that are text heavy. Like sometimes even ones that are fully voiced still have like tutorial text and like lengthy item descriptions, that kind of stuff. And that really hinders, especially tutorial text. Like if you can't read that, you miss out on like fundamental sections of the game. And yeah, finding ways to get them is what I'm working on. So it's weird in social situations as well, having dyslexia. At play parties, if you go to sit down and play a game that's like really wordy and you've not realized, you can feel quite stupid. And it's quite hard to stand up and just say, sorry, I can't play your game, and you just kind of struggle through. It's not very good. There's one game in particular that I remember this happening. Was this game? I can't even pronounce the name of the title. I can't even read it still. But the team made the game at the same jam as me, and then at the play party, I sat down to play it. I thought it looked amazing. The style was really cool, and I was just like skipping through, and he says, you won't be able to enjoy this game if you continue to skip through the way you are. So I was like, I just stood up and says, it looks amazing, but it's really just not for me. Like, please don't feel offended, but I can't play your game. And then we just kind of moved on. But from that point, I was like, I really want other people to like empathize. Like, it's really hard to empathize with something if you don't have a point of reference of like how hard it is to read. So I made this game called A Familiar Fairy Tale, a dyslexic text-based adventure that it's designed to make you feel like being dyslexic. Here's the tutorial for that. It's quite cool. It starts off easy and then it gets harder as the page goes on. And the good thing about this is the hardest word to read on this page is literally the word easy. But I've been at so many events where I've been showing people that they've got stuck on this bit, and I've been like, come on, it's literally easy. And it highlights the point that if you're not getting it, it's not easy. And that's kind of what dyslexia is all about. So it starts off as a simple fairy tale story where, like, once upon a time, if you couldn't get it there, it moves up and down. I removed the spaces, redistributed them, and then offset the words up and down. It continues like that for a few pages, and then every chapter it changes the rules a little bit, so you never get quite used to it. And then I throw some decisions at you, some multiple choice answers. So you need to read 4 things, make an informed decision, and you're also under the time pressure of a time bar at the bottom. That's a dig at these type of games, like the Telltale games, that are fully voiced apart from the decision-making elements, which are the bit where the actual game really comes in. They do a good job at making the options small, but they're still hard to read for a dyslexic person. And for non-dyslexic people, they find it frustrating that they don't have enough information in these sections to know exactly what their outcome will be after picking them. So people think that this might be a quick fix. A lot of people just say, I'll just use open dyslexia or color overlays, but these are more to do with scotopic sensitivity syndrome rather than actual dyslexia. They do come hand in hand, but it is a different thing. You can look more into that. It's more about like visual perception and the words jumping about on the page. So I did implement an option where you can put open dyslexia into the game, but you can see it doesn't make it any easier to read. It still has some of the issues, and in my case, actually makes it worse. The difference in thickness really hurts my scotopic sensitivity. The color overlays, on the other hand, do help a little bit on the keeping the letters on the page, but they still don't solve the problem. I really like the green, and I did use overlays for a long time. Then text-to-speech is the thing that, like, it's the absolute game changer for dyslexics. I discovered it in college, and it absolutely changed the way that I live my life. Like, it meant that I could read things online. It meant that I could, read emails, reply to stuff quickly, and wasn't completely baffled by them. I did also implement that into the game, and it shows the difference between like struggling to decode the text and actually like enjoying the story. It's absolute night and day when you turn that option on. That game got some media attention, got some big people online talking about it, and really getting the essence of what I was trying to go for. And it got in the local newspaper. They spelt my name wrong, which the irony was not lost on me there. It also got nominated for a Taiga Award last year. Didn't win, but to get nominated was a real honor. Some studios are really trying to fix this. This was the one that really made me like call to action on me doing this stuff. Overland, it looks amazing. I really wanted to play this game, and they had the story of like wanting to help their dyslexic players play it. So they implemented open dyslexia as the dyslexic friendly option. But if you can see the difference on these two, I can read the top one more than the bottom one, which is supposed to be the more accessible one. And that's because open dyslexia has been proven in numerous studies to have little to no effect in reading ability. And in some people, they actually actively hate it and think it is worse, like I do. Another game that did try it, and I was ready to get on the comment section and say, oh, you're just going to use open dyslexia. They didn't. They actually followed the rules a bit more, did a bit more research, and used just a sans serif font with upper and lowercase, whereas the other game went all caps, and that's kind of against the recommended things as well. So from that, I realized people are trying to help out, but they're not quite hitting the mark. So it might have to be me that tries to solve this problem. So I heard in-game we're doing vouchers, like R&D vouchers, to help you get your ideas up. So I applied to make a Unity plugin that makes it easy for developers to create dyslexia-friendly text-to-speech for games. That turned out to be Dyslexic. It's this floating bar, so you pause the game, this pops up, so that gives you enough time to read all the options, and then anywhere that you click, it reads using the text-to-speech thing. He was in one of the games that I made recently. It uses native operating system text-to-speech, so that makes it lightweight. It doesn't add any to your bundle size, really. It uses installed voices, so if people that are used to using text-to-speech, they can use the voices that they like. And yeah, it also gives you the ability to pause the game, which if we did it on a system overlay, you couldn't do that. It also made me realize that it's quite a small world, because back to this game, one of the guys working on at Endgame, he had just started, was one of the guys that worked on this game. So I thought it was a real nice bring it back together from being a game that I couldn't play and actually had a story about not being able to play, to now I can play it because of a tool that we built. So the future of that, we're just past the user testing. So it's going to be launching on Windows soon. And then we plan to go to Mac, iOS, and Android, because they all have native text-to-speech APIs that we can call. The dream is obviously go to consoles, whatever, but they do not have a system, so we'll have to make something a bit more robust later down the line. And the hope is that it can either become an industry standard itself or influence others into this way of thinking, and we can work on it together and get something that works for everyone. And another honorable mention, though, on games is The Last of Us 2. It has the most accessibility features in any game ever, I think. And I was super surprised when I started to play it. And the first thing it asks you is, do you want text-to-speech enabled? Like, before any of the action or anything. I thought it was such a bold move for a big developer like this to put the accessibility that much up front, because it means that any other option after that point is then accessible to people that can't read. It's meant for people that are visually impaired, but dyslexics can piggyback on that really well as well. And yeah, there's just so many options. If you're interested in accessibility at all, take a look at The Last of Us 2. So I'm hoping that people are going to want to jump on the bandwagon of the big studio Last of Us 2, kind of want to be more accessible, and that the tools that I'm building can help games be accessed by more people. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ali. That was absolutely brilliant to hear more about your work. I've known about your tool, but I didn't know much about the history behind it. And it sounds absolutely fantastic. I think it's great work that you're doing, and it sounds like the chat agrees as well. Thank you for telling us more. Again, if you've got questions for Ali, pop them in the chat too, and we'll come back to it at the end with our panel. But in the meantime, please give Ali a round of applause. Julie has also suggested you could do the sign version. So one or the other. What a great suggestion. Thanks, Julie. Fantastic. Thanks again, Ali. So next up, we are welcoming Nida Ahmad, who is a UX designer with a focus on creating playful, useful experiences with accessibility and psychology in mind. She has worked on Warhammer combat cards and is currently an upcoming social massively multiplayer online game. She is an advocate for integrating UX processes into game development, having spoken at industry conferences, and was nominated for the Game Dev Heroes Award as a result. She's also a mentor for students studying games, was a reader for the BAFTA Young Game Designer Awards, and is on the founding team of People of Colour in Play, who strive to increase the inclusion of people of colour in the industry. So I'll just find Nida and invite her up to join us. Hello, Nida. How are you?
I'm okay, kind of nervous. Hopefully people find this interesting and useful.
I'm sure we will. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Should I just share my screen?
Yeah, please, go for it.
Ooh. Okay, is it sharing? I'm just gonna jump between that. Yep. Yeah, okay, got it. Hi everyone, I'm listening to this. So today I'm going to be talking about UX, which means user experience, and its role in creating empathy for players, but also your team members. It's a really interesting role that's kind of growing in the industry. So hopefully I can tell you a little bit more about it and how you can involve UX practices if you are a developer as well in your work, without worrying about like money and time and things like that. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that like lots of games are coming out regularly, and for a lot of the big ones, there's often clones and things like that. So the example I'm giving here is like Fortnite. This is like the mobile version of it, so the buttons are slightly different. And then on the right, there is Fortcraft, which is a Fortnite clone. I put it in air quotes because that's just how people refer to it. And I think this shows like a really good example about like what UX is and isn't. So often UX is compared to UI and often molded together. But actually you can see like the UI here is fairly similar, at least in placement and some of the color palette, but the games have completely different experiences. So Fortnite is a pretty massive game, but many people haven't heard of Fortcraft, for example, even though it's taken a lot of the same mechanics and visual design and is even on mobile as well. So it's accessible in the same way as Fortnite. And I think this kind of explains how UX can play a role here. So it's more like when you put the game in someone's hand, it might look the same, but it's going to feel different. And it's the job of UX is kind of taking that abstract definition of feeling and turning it into something more objective and something measurable. So we as a team could understand what is it about the feeling that we're creating and which type of feeling do we want to make. So if just breaking down what UX is a little bit more, UX involves consideration of like a human computer interaction and psychology. So specifically looking at like how do people interact with objects and how can we use that to create the best experiences possible, in terms of like what behaviors do we want to elicit or what emotions do we want to elicit. And a key part of this is translating design intent, so from your game designers, your product managers, your CEO, whoever, into something that's quite memorable and understandable for your players. So it's turning it into what I call player speak, so that players understand what the designer wants them to do to get a really cool experience. So I think there's 3 parts to UX. So the first part is usability, and this is what UX was traditionally known as, where it's very much about functionality and understanding if people are able to learn what type of experiences they want. So are they getting the right types of feedback? Do they know where they need to go next? Are we teaching the mechanics in an appropriate way, right? So that's more about understanding. But I still think there's another part to it, which is creating something quite fun and engaging. So how do we make this interesting and something that makes people leave with a feeling of positivity rather than like anger and things like that? And then the third pillar, I think, is inclusion. So this could be in the form of accessibility, as you've heard in the previous talks, or it could also just be diversity and inclusion. So the example I wanted to give here of showing like the different parts of UX is this screen cap from Overwatch. So you can see there's some accessibility considerations here. So we've got like a red and blue in the UI, which are high contrast. So it makes it easier to distinguish between what's an enemy thing or what's part of your team or what's progression. Also on this gun, for example, you can see how many bullets you have left based on how many you've shot, which is really cool because then you've got an in-world form of feedback about when you need to reload and how much you've already used, rather than just a number on the screen, which you might miss in your peripheral vision, because generally when you're playing FPS games, you're looking at the center of the screen. So having that key information around that area really helps the player and stops them from dying, for example, if they lose, if they look in the wrong direction. So it's thinking about all these types of small things and piecing them together into something quite coherent is a big part of what the UX job is. And then I want to talk a little bit about what role UX can play in the teams. So in this case, I've put UX at the center in the sense that I think UX plays a really holistic role in game development. So in teams, you'll often see a UX person sitting outside the development team, just so they can have a high level overview of all features that are currently in development, as well as which are being planned, so that you can get the player's voice and consideration in early on. And the goal of UX is essentially to help people become more aware of like how players are going to interact with your game, and also help each team member in all these different teams that I've mentioned here understand how they can connect and translate their vision. So like with the art team, I might be doing some work around if they have NPCs, for example, is it clear what type of NPC this character is? Like if they're meant to be someone with a certain vibe, is that being like translated well? Is it readable? With the game designers, this might be unpacking the feature spec with them. So breaking down how we're going to communicate these systems to the player. But also with community management, it might just be how do we create a process of talking to our players and getting them into playtest often. So the role of a UX person and UX in general can vary very much depending on the team they're working with and the types of people they're working with. But the main goal of what I think I need to do is just make everyone's job much easier. And I encourage that by considering the player needs first, so they know what they need to prioritize and focus on. So even though UX sits in the middle of game dev, like all game dev disciplines, it's also really good in between the players and the team as well, because UX works as like an advocacy role for the players, and ensuring that the general idea of what the game is from the game developers matches what the players think and understand that the game is. So it's kind of creating like common language between both groups. So it's kind of a tough role, but it's really fun. So I think there's like 3 to 4 different ways that a development studio can start connecting with their players and being more empathetic to them in their approach, just to make much better games. So a key part of the UX process right at the start is that you ask, who are our players? Which is a really huge, broad question. And also, why do we think they're going to enjoy our game? So it's very much evidence-based. We'd like to use a lot of data, statistics, and conversations through directly talking with our users about what their needs are and then tailor what their game is. So here I've shown a quote from an interview from the lead designer of Bumble, the dating app. And she was talking about vulnerability, which I think is another part of empathy. Like empathy is such a broad phrase in itself. And I think this quote kind of breaks down what it can involve. So they go through like an empathy-based design process, and it's very much looking at what role is this app going to play in our customers' lives, and why would they even try to use our app? So in the last sentence, for example, they talk about they want to learn about their customers' fears, what they love, and what they think falling in love is. And I think the translation for that in games is very much, what types of games do they love? What types of games don't they like? What types of gaming memories do they have? What types of feelings do games give them? And what are they looking for in a future game? It's very much about asking those questions so we can create a sense of trust with the player, so they understand that they can be vulnerable when they're playing the game, because games are a very emotional experience, right? Regardless of the game that you play, there's always some form of connection that the player creates with it. It's ensuring that we respect that and give them the best experience possible around that. So for example, when I joined NetSpeak, my current company, the first task I did was actually talk to our players. So I ran some interviews, excuse me, like half an hour long interviews, just chatting with potential players from our target audience and asking them questions such as this. And it was a really insightful process, because you understand like why people would even gravitate towards a game like yours. Like putting aside all the rewards and stuff, what is like the intrinsic motivational need that we're trying to fulfill? And I think if you focus on that stuff quite a lot, you'll get players who want to play your game for a really long time. And also it ensures that we create something that empowers our players, and makes them feel like they can personalize the world that they're in and have a huge impact. And having the team learn about these types of insights also helps them understand that, what's the right phrasing for this? Sometimes like games that game developers make think they're making the game for themselves, and it's kind of bringing themselves out of that bubble and saying, hey, we've actually got this audience that we want to focus on. And this is how you can connect with them, by understanding them as people. So I'm just going to go through 3 quick ways that you as a developer, you don't need to be a UX specialist specifically to do a lot of these types of workshops and tasks, but 3 ways you can connect with your players or start devising solutions. So this process. So there's first like recognizing who your players are, which I've covered a little bit, understanding them on a deeper level, and understanding what potential solutions they are, and then identifying what that solution could look like to the problem. So a huge part of UX is just uncovering a lot of issues players might have with competitor titles or might have with your titles, again, in terms of maybe accessibility, or just generally if they're not the typical type of player for this game, what problems might they encounter, and trying to do away with that type of risk. So the first type of method I mentioned is affinity mapping. So this is from when I did my interviews of 30 different players. And then those interview responses, I kind of grouped them into different themes and categories together. So like, for example, with the top row, I'm talking about there's 3 different factors I found that impact which games people play. So I've already got 3 key reasons. And it's really clear to the team as well now that, oh, there's 3 key reasons that we can focus on without having to read a super lengthy report. And I tend to do this in a workshop format. So I might put each interesting point on a post-it note, and then put it on the board and then have the team sort them into different themes. So they're absorbing the information and they're having those really important discussions together already without me even telling them the answers, right? Because people are learning through their own hands-on process, which is really cool. The second method is the how might we method. So this is a really useful method when you want to figure out what solutions you can have for specific problems. So if you've got, I don't know, like 2 really big problems that you want to solve, as a team, you can list out all possible solutions from a tech perspective, from a UI, UX, game design perspective. Just list everything that comes to mind out. And then as a team, go through each one and prioritize which solution you think will be best. And then you get some team consensus around that. So essentially, the statements will start with, how might we solve X problem? And then you've got a solution for that. So that's a really good method that I tend to use regularly because it helps you frame the problem in a much clearer way for your development team, especially if they don't want to read the really long report. You can create like one succinct sentence as your problem statement and then help everyone work through that. And then the third method which is the one that most people are probably more aware of, which is wireframing and sketching. So here I've shown like a really low fidelity shop menu, but even though it's gray boxes and there's no images and it's, to be frank, pretty ugly, you still get the message across of, okay, this is how I think the shop could look like. And using low fidelity prototyping and sketches is really useful because then if people don't like the idea, you can scrap it. You've not really spent any tech time or like any tech resources around it. You can just iterate on this, but also you can playtest this if you want as well. So maybe have players interact with it and give their feedback as well. And also another point that I think is really important is getting the team to directly connect with players. There's lots of ways you can do this. So maybe through the community manager on like your Discord or Twitter or things like that, but also just showing people like the different areas and tasks of UX is a big part of my job as well. So usually when I'm getting prepared for a playtest, I'll usually have like some game designers or even programmers joining me. And we'll work through what are the research objectives. So what things do we want to test for this playtest and what are our success criteria? So is it that players finish this tutorial? Is that going to be our metric for testing this was a successful tutorial? Or what other factors or things that they're worried about they can talk about there, because then it helps me frame the questions I can ask players as well. Sometimes I might get developers to help me with questions as well if they really want to get into it, because people want to learn more about what UX is. And then we start playtesting often. So for example, at NetSpeak, we use like an external provider for playtesting. So when we get the videos back, I usually have 1 or 2 other developers in the team going through the videos with me to analyze them, just because they're interested. So they might take some of the high level insights back to the team, or I might make like a clip of a certain playtest, like a really interesting section I might clip, and then drop it in our Slack, and then get the team discussing it that way as well, in case people don't want to read the report again and find that boring. But it's encouraging these types of conversations is really good, because I think UX, even though you might have a UX person at your company, it's really important to be aware that UX is the responsibility of everyone. And everyone should care about the player and try to devise solutions that that lower a lot of the friction and accessibility barriers that players might face. So the example given earlier about The Last of Us 2 was really interesting. The fact that they allowed players to pre-choose a lot of settings beforehand, like that's going to take a lot of stress down the line, and it helps players customize their experience. So having these types of affordances for the player will be really useful, and it helps the team understand who their players are a bit more as well, if they are getting hands-on with the data. And the last thing I think you could be doing as a development team is looking at alternative models of game design or game development as well. So traditionally, we often think about like games being like a high adrenaline experience, high stress experience, or like that should be the right way, give or take, that games should be experienced or played or made. But also when you look at these models, you actually understand that people have different responses and different responses to stress, but also different motivations to play games. And we need to make sure that you're hitting as many of them as possible, depending on who your audience is, but also just go like broadening your awareness of what games can be, right? Like FPS games and battle royale games are amazing and they have their own place. But there's also another whole other spectrum of games to consider. So for example, the first model that I think is super interesting and is one I'm reading up a lot on these days is the 10 number friend model, which essentially says that for some people, when they're stressed, they tend to release a lot of oxytocin, which enables like social bonding and feelings of love. So people want to connect more with others when they're stressed. And this raises really interesting questions around, well, what types of game mechanics can you make that encourage, you know, multiplayer experiences or low stress responses, or is it like taking care of something helps you feel a lot better? And that's a whole other part of game development that isn't getting the attention that it needs. And I think there should be a lot more around there, because considering those types of players is also you being empathetic, right, to different types of needs and different types of responses to games. The second type of one is the gamer motivation model, which is a great model based on research of 140,000 players who played like MMOs and a variety of games. And they found that there's six key motivations for people to play games. So these are action, social, mastery, creativity, achievement, immersion. Yeah, so you can see that's fairly broad. But being able to segment players into which one they might lean to more rather than which one they are can help you understand what types of experiences your target audience is looking for. And then the third one is self-determination theory. This is applicable to all types of players. And it should be one of the key ones you should always be considering when you're designing a game, but also designing different features. So it says there's 3 psychological needs that players need to be met when they're playing a game. So the first one is autonomy, which is, do they feel a sense of choice in the things that they're doing? Are they in a situation where they feel they can have a lot of impact in the world? Can they see the difference that they're making? And can they make their own way in the game environment and create the experience that they want? The second one is competence. So people want to feel good about their skills, which is why a lot of people play games, because it might be an escape from their real life, and here they can just focus on one thing and just get good at it or master skills around it. So one way you can deal with this is creating like really good progression mechanics, or maybe even skill trees. So like Skyrim has a really nice skill tree. even though it works like a lot of other skill trees, it's really nice and interactive, and it works really nice in the environment where players can get, I think it works like star signs type of stuff, or like star constellation, sorry. And it's really enjoyable in that way, but also really usable because you can just flick through a whole list of skills super easy. And then the third one is people really want to relate to something in the world, usually other people. So you can think about this in the sense of, do we create really relatable NPCs who look similar to the player character or have certain backstories that they can relate to in real life? Or do we give them situations where they can play multiplayer? So you can see these are really broad, distinct models, and each play their own role in game development. So pick and choose and research which ones work for you. But essentially, there are new ways of considering who your players are and what type of game you want to make for them. So just to round this off, hopefully this was super useful for you. But a key point to take away is that the role of UX is to create a somewhat and as much as possible seamless experience for your players, to the point where they don't notice that there's good UX. You don't want them to feel friction in areas that they shouldn't be, again, around settings or just getting into the game or the tutorial. But you don't want to get in the way of their progress either, just so they can experience the game as intended, especially if it's a really intense game, like emotionally or playtime wise or anything like that. You want to make it as smooth as possible. And just remember that, like, there's a saying around, like, people don't remember what you said. It's more about how you made them feel. And it's the same thing with games. Like, people might not remember too much about a game they played years ago, but they will remember how they left feeling, and keep that in mind when you are developing your game. Because essentially the role of UX is to give more context to development around what type of game they're making, but also to the players to give them the best experience possible. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nida. That was so fascinating. I loved hearing about especially the psychological interpretation and background to it. Thank you so much. It's brilliant. Please give Nida a round of applause or sign, whatever you prefer. Fantastic. Thanks a lot. Great. Okay, so our last speaker for a mini talk is the amazing Marina Diez, who is a Spanish award-winning game designer based in London, except not anymore. She's now in Germany. She's the CEO and creative director at 3 of Cups Games, a game studio now based in Germany. Besides that, she's the lead game designer of Dordogne, I hope I'm saying that correctly, at Un Je ne sais quoi Studios, and a game designer for a studio in Helsinki, Finland. Marina, we'll just bring you up now. Excited to have you. There you are. Hello, who are you?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. This is amazing. And before starting my talk, I just wanted to say that I absolutely admire all the people that is talking today in general in the festival. I think it's really great. So congratulations. And I'm gonna share with everyone my screen now. So I start my talk. Here we go. So basically today I want to talk about finding your voice in the games industry, that it's also not super related to game design, but it's super related to game design, because when I was hired for the first time professionally as a game designer, I thought that I sucked, basically. And it's a feeling that I believe that everyone shares the first time everyone gets a role in the games industry. And I thought that it was an important thing to talk about it today in this special festival as well. So the first slide that I have here for all of you is this: I feel that I don't fit in the games industry, and I believe I'm not the only one feeling like this. I started my career in the games industry making my own games. So, you know, reading lots of books, going to all the talks. I'm a Gemini, so I want to do everything. And at the same time, and it was surprising that when I got my first paid role in the games industry, that it was last year, I felt that I didn't feel to this industry anymore, even though I was making everything. And it's because we have lots of imposter syndrome. And it's also because kind of we are not able sometimes to find what we are best at in our jobs. And in my kind of path of trying to live authentically, I also found what I'm best at in the games industry, that it's working with emotional game design. That basically is what I do in my roles currently, and it's designing all my games in based of the emotions that I want to evoking the players instead of all the way around, because normally I was taught that you needed to first come up with the mechanics and then see which kind of emotions you were able to evoke in the player. And that for me was totally not working, because I'm also passion and emotion. So for me it was completely like impossible to think technically about making my own games without thinking first on the kind of emotions that I want to have in my games. Then this is something that helped me massively. Labels are just labels, and someone creates them. Create your own. That's exactly what I've done. I don't know if there are other game designers out there that call themselves emotional game designer. It was also a difficult decision for me to start calling myself emotional, because emotional has kind of a very still not good connotations, as it's also sometimes used in a very misogynistic way. Like when a woman is emotional, it's normally a woman that is not able to make decisions, or that is not suitable for leading a team, and that kind of stuff that obviously is not true. So it was difficult, but in the other way, I kind of wanted to start giving better connotations to the term, and using emotions and emotional as something we should be proud of and we should know better of, in order to kind of lead in our lives, and making better decisions, and a lot of stuff that I'm also discovering in one of my roles that at the moment kind of makes me also research a lot on psychology, and it's lots written about how important emotions are for our day-to-day, basically. So create your own. Don't worry, even if it doesn't exist, you will make it exist. So that's a good thing. Then work on your voice. Basically, it's the same thing that I was saying until now, that we are sometimes scared of starting or kind of own thing. So I feel that if you don't start, who's gonna start? So you need to go for it and start kind of developing your brand authentically with what you think sticks better to your personality, and working on that, because the people that hire you is people that are hiring you because you are yourself and you are unique. So that's something that I also learned recently this summer, when I had lots and lots and lots of imposter syndrome. And like I was intimidated by other peeps in the games industry, because in the specific case of making charts, I'm not a game designer that normally works with lots of charts and wireframes and stuff. And I thought that I was not that real game designer because of that, while I realized that my bosses and the people that believe in my work were not hiring me because of my ability or future ability of making charts, but because of my ability to do other stuff that the other coworkers and peeps were not able to do as well as I did in those projects. So that's very important. So work on your voice without fear, and remember that being unique is amazing, and you don't need to be the same as your other coworkers or friends, because that's not gonna make you be in the spotlight, basically. Then, super related to the last thing, believe in yourself and just do it. I think that this is also something that has many different meanings in the first term, because it's super difficult to just do it if you come from a marginalized background in many different ways. So I think just do it is a really nice prompt, but at the same time, if you use it, I think I'm responsible of saying to you that this applies very different to very different people. So I'm not saying to you, just do it, go into bankrupt and live your dream, because that's not true. In my case, just do it meant to go into debt with my parents, and they were happy. I mean, not happy, of course, but they were able to take the risk and believe in myself, and ask for loans in order for me to go to the UK to study game design, because in Spain I didn't have the possibility to study there. So it was very difficult. So just do it. It's not just do it. It means lots of things, but believe in yourself applies to everyone. And I believe that it doesn't matter where you come from, but you are able to take tiny actions that will help you to chase your dreams in some way. And sometimes we are privileged or lucky enough to just do it. But sometimes just do it means also to take today a tiny action in order to make that dream come true. Maybe it's just 5 minutes working on Bitsy. That's how I started, without money, without anything, just dedicating a bit of time every day to my passion. And that's my way of just do it when I didn't have possibilities to do more. And of course, believing yourself is something that I'm still fighting with, because it's not easy. And which is easy saying to you today, believe in yourself. But we all know that that's not how it works. But, like maybe, again, every day you are able to do something or have a nice thought of you or for yourself to make that belief in yourself come true. And someday you will feel much better. But also talking to other people more experienced in the games industry, the feeling of not believing in yourself never goes away. So I think that we should just learn how to live with it. Then work in your own way. Different is cool. Like it doesn't matter that you are not the same professional as the other game designer in your team, or as the other whoever, whatever you do in your job. Work in your own way is what makes us different and valuable. So I think that when we are able to do it in our companies, we should excel in our own way. So, and not be scared of showing what makes us different. And then we can find our own voices if we are constantly blaming ourselves for not being like everyone else. And this is something that also I'm also learning myself, that I'm not better game designer when I say to myself like, oh, why you don't do this well, and that kind of stuff. Like if we are already nervous about doing something, and we, instead of saying nice things to us and being compassionate, we are just blaming ourselves because we don't reach that level yet, or whatever we need to do and we didn't excel, or because we made a mistake. That's not going to make us progress. All the contrary, like it's demonstrated that people work much better when people around work colleagues and bosses are compassionate and with them, because we are all human, instead of treating ourselves badly. And then different is nice and valuable. Again, without doing things differently, we just can't progress. And if we do the same thing over and over, it's just not progress. It's gonna be nice, but it's not gonna be perfect or better. So I think it's very important to keep doing things different and promoting different things in the games industry, and not keep going with the same stuff over and over again. And that's all from my side. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope this is useful.
Thank you, Marina. That was so useful, absolutely fascinating and really inspiring and positive outlook. I loved hearing about, just your approach to games, but I think so much of what you're saying can be applied to so many people, I'm sure. And it looks like the chat have been finding it really relevant. So thank you again. One more time, I'll ask everyone to unmute and please give Marina a round of applause or sign hands. I'll do both. Thanks, everyone. So, thank you for staying with us, folks, too. We've gone over just a tiny bit, but I think it would be nice to bring speakers up and maybe have time for a question or two, because there's been some really interesting ones. So, obviously, if you have to leave, then that's completely understandable. But just for the last 5 minutes or so, I'll bring up our speakers again to join me. Sorry, Natalie. There we go. I think I've got everyone. Hi again, everybody. Thank you for your talks. So yeah, it's a bit hard to pick a question, but there's been some really interesting points about, because we've touched a lot about physical control and interaction and accessibility and ways that UX or tools can help that. And Heather asked in the chat, do you think games that are intentionally difficult to win are good at getting us to empathize with certain characters and their difficulties or struggles? And Jem came in with that as well and added, or do they risk over challenging those who are trying to escape the difficulties and struggles of a mundane world? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or comments on that to respond to. One thing that certainly came up for me with what you were talking about too, The Last of Us came up a couple of times. And I think, Ali, it was really interesting to hear about just how accessible and how many settings there are for that. But I personally, I've played that a bit too, and I thought there was a lot of it I loved, but I thought the controls were the opposite. And I couldn't tell if it was a choice around trying to make the game difficult so it felt more scary. Liam also mentioned in the chat about he's found similar things with survival horror, that maybe that friction in control is useful. What do you think there's a balance between the emotion you want a player to feel and how intuitive or inclusive the controls might be?
I think it's certainly a risk. I think there's a difference. There can often be a fine line between difficult but fun and difficult and frustrating. And when it comes to having certain mechanics being difficult, like let's say like a timed event, that's something that you can see fairly common among not just survival horrors, but on other games. Timed events can often feel pretty stressful. There's also the difficulty of like latency. You press a button and it doesn't exactly react at the time you need it to react. I think that's an example of difficult but frustrating. There's a way to mitigate that where the difficulty comes from the feeling of high stakes surrounding that moment of nailing the quick time event, as opposed to missing it because the button that you pressed didn't register in time for the game to take that into account and say that you were successful. I think in a lot of cases, I think I mentioned Hades in the chat. Hades is an example, I think, of a game that takes difficulty and it adds to the game experience. You're repeatedly going through the same kinds of environments and fighting increasingly difficult enemies, but that helps to enforce the mythology of the game that you're in, of trying to escape the underworld, which is a seemingly impossible task. So it would make sense that the game kind of reflects that same kind of heavy difficulty of escaping the underworld as opposed to something very easy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. It's certainly there's something in controls too, even if there's just a lot of things you have to press at once, or which I imagine a lot of players appreciate the skill in that too, which I think Natalie and Nida touched on a little bit too. Well, I think we've probably gone over a bit there, so thank you everybody for speaking again, and to everybody who's come to watch and join us today. That was a really brilliant set of mini talks looking at a massive range of fascinating areas.